Thank you so much to everyone who joined us yesterday. We had a beautiful time. Those who are here with us in person in Charlotte and those who are with us via live stream. Thank you for bearing with us through any technical issues. You know, it's been 3 years since we've been in person. And so, you know, just working back through those live kinks, but it was so beautiful and so wonderful. And I pray that even more of you are able to be with us in person next year and to just feel that energy and vibration of love that we all share together. And it's my pleasure to welcome you today to this virtual panel. I'm so grateful that we are able to have the dynamic speakers with us to share with us in this forum. I know that, you know, of course, we're still smoothing through things as we come back in person. And so not everyone was able to join us live. And so it's beautiful that we're able to convene on Ogun's internet and to do this virtual panel this morning. So I welcome all of you. I know more people will be joining us. And I would like for us to come right into it and begin with Dr. Joanna Hunter, Iyanifa Omotinue, who is the owner of Black Madonna Enterprises Publishing Company. She's been involved in the study of Yoruba Isheshe and Lukumi Orisha religion for more than 3 decades. She's an Orisha of Aganju and an Iyanifa with an MA in Cultural Sociology and an honorary PhD in Metaphysics. She's presented at many conferences, including this one, and has lectured, written, and taught classes on the healing aspects of Yoruba culture and her experiences living and traveling in Africa and the Caribbean, Asia, South America. She's the author of the groundbreaking book, My Journey to Aganju, the Orisha So Hard to Find, which I highly recommend. And she also has books by Pierre Verger and other books available at her site, Black Madonna Enterprises, which you can find in the conference journal. And her presentation today is entitled Mouth, the Healing Divinity That Brings Favor. Let's give Ashe fingers to Iya Joanna. Blessings and welcome, Iya.
Thank you, Funlayo. You're going to have to kind of walk me through this to put up my slides and such. Are you going to share a screen or am I able to do it?
Yeah, you're able to do it. Just the share screen at the bottom and.
Okay. Oh, here we go. Sorry.
All good.
I'm not seeing you. Are you able to see my?
No, it's not shared. So at the green share screen at the bottom, and then you should see it has to be open first before you're able to do that. So make sure it's open.
Okay, so I'm clicking on share, start the share screen. Okay.
And then you'll select your presentation from the list of things that opens. There we go.
Okay. Sorry about that.
It's all good. And then the slideshow at the top. Or yeah, from beginning where you just had your mouse, that works too.
Oh boy. Okay. All right. I think we have it. Yes?
There you go. Yes.
Okie dokie. So I want to thank you, of course, for allowing me to present at this conference. You know that you, of course, are one of my favorites. And I don't say that just because you're here. So Let me try to breeze through these slides. As usual, I've got a little bit more than I thought, but I think that I can finish up in the 15 minutes. So what we're going to talk about today is mouth and how it's perceived by the traditional Yoruba. The Yoruba believe that mouth, or enu, is an important, powerful charm. Okay. And for this paper, I used Ifa divination verses, praise poems, and songs to illustrate the health-giving benefits of recognizing the mouth as a divinity that is not only capable of communication, but also of manifesting great wealth and long life and well-being. And I also intend to show the cross-cultural significance of healing works that are performed to the head and the neck area that are considered centers of spiritual power by the Yoruba, and how they closely correspond to regions called chakras in the Hindu Buddhist healing practices. All right, so this is the one of the first verses that talks about mouth. There's a lot of them. I'm only going to show one for the purpose of this presentation. And it says that the mouth is a gungun, or the mouth is an orisha. It is mouth that they are offering sacrifices to in the city of Ife that is making life habitually better. Let us try to offer sacrifices to the mouth. The mouth is word. So in this verse of Okanran Otura, we're told that the mouth is an orisha, that the mouth is an ancestor, and that the mouth enables human beings to speak words that are or were taught to us by the divinities to bring about wealth and good health and well-being. And according to this poem, it's the mouth that the great philosopher priest of Ife offered sacrifices to so that the world would be a better place to live in. And it may seem somewhat amazing, but according to a 2,000-year-old Ifa poem, they found 2,000 years ago that when you feed people, they're less likely to cause discord. And so that's how you make a world a better place. So in other words, I guess, Ifa knew about being hangry, which is something that we sometimes suffer from today. And scientific research also supports the wisdom of Ifa. And according to a United Nations news article, conflict and hunger exist in a back and forth relationship where one tends to increase the other. Today, conflict is the main driver of hunger in most of the world's food crises. And in 2022, around 2.3 billion people, that's 29% of the world's population, was moderately or severely food insecure. Moreover, this also includes the United States, which most people don't think of as being food insecure, and that 30 million of those billion people were from the United States, and 12 million were children that were moderately or severely food insecure. So the bottom line is that a well-fed mouth is very important. Next up is an Oriki in or praise poem, which again, we're reminded that not only is the mouth an ancestor or an Orisha, but the mouth also has Ashe, or spiritual power. Furthermore, we're told that the mouth will support whatever it is that we say. And so therefore, we have to be very, very careful what we say. We should really be acting like the ancestors and Orisha are listening, because they are, okay? and they'll support what it is that we say. So, for example, when we use I am, which is believed to be an active or believed to activate, rather, the creative power and bring into expression our belief or intention that we're claiming, it's really important that we use it wisely, that we say, for instance, I am healthy, okay, even though we may be feeling like crap. And so this will help bring about good health as well as wealth and other things that we're claiming. Um, Next slide. Devotees of Ifa, as well as those of other traditions, believe in the power of speech. And mouth can do good as well as evil. And this is very important, kind of what I was alluding to before. The mouth can make one well, the mouth can make one sick, the mouth can make one healthy, the mouth can make one broke. Ajay, or wealth, lives on the tongue, so that they say. So again, if anything, we really need to remember to be careful what we speak. Therefore, we're cautioned in many Ifa verses about the price that we pay for speaking too much. All right. And in the next slide here, we have an example from a verse of Ogunda Osa. And we're told here that flies can only enter the mouth when it is open, meaning we are better off most times keeping our mouth shut. Put another way, it's probably the best way of being able to stay in good health is to stay quiet. We're also told in Otura Meiji that the evil brought about by the mouth is probably the worst kind of evil. And in this poem, we're warned not to be like the squirrel, which is considered to be a chatterbox. In another verse of Otura Meiji, we're told that the squirrel lived close to the tree, to the road rather, and the squirrel had went for Ifa divination, and the squirrel was told that he should probably keep his mouth shut. Unfortunately, to make a long story somewhat short, the squirrel didn't listen to the advice of Ifa, and he was very, very proud of the twins that his wife had, and so therefore he shot off his mouth about the lovely twins that he had. Unfortunately, he was heard by humans. Humans snatched up his twins, and it's said that they put them with pounded yam over a soup. So, harsh lesson. But the point being here, again, is that we are advised not to talk so much about our business or what it is that we're doing. Another aspect of this is also sealed lips. And sealed lips are frequently depicted in Yoruba statuary and photographs of people. Sealed lips to the Yoruba are a sign of good character. It connotes a kind of coolness or enu etutu. And enu etutu is one of the ways that the Yorubas say he fell silent. Which I find amusing because we also have that in African American vernacular too. Many of the youth will say less, okay? And having a cool mouth, not only for the Yoruba, but also for African Americans, or I'd say for all people, is something that's very important, especially when one considers mouth can bless one or it can curse one. And here we're reminded that curse and ashe were born on the same day. In other words, they're both one and the same. They're the one side of this, or two sides of the same coin. And consequently, in this picture, what we're seeing here is a gagged man. And he is gagged so that he will not be able to curse his executioners. So a little heavy, but The next slides, I'm going to go into some of the more healing aspects of the mouth. Members of the Yoruba society are active users of verbal arts, and these arts are used by both males and females in their capacity of fathers and mothers and priests and artists. If we accept that sound is a vibration, then we can understand how vibration touches every aspect of our being. So again, sound can be very important, especially that which is made with the mouth. The Yoruba use verbal arts in traditional healthcare, for example, by using orine, songs, incantation, ofo, and oriki praise names. The healing music is an age-old tradition in Africa in general and in Nigeria in particular. And this slide shows a song that is sung by mothers to have a positive impact on delivery. This is eco-musological song. We use song also in Yoruba to assist as well as venerate nature. And this song is being sung to Yemonja, who in Yoruba land is thought of as the Ogun River. And in the diaspora, she's associated with the ocean. But the point of the song is to remind us of the need to respect not only this Orisha, but the space that she inhabits. And in this case, she's being sung to so that her waters will not flood the houses. And so the people are pleading with her to please don't flood our house. I didn't think I was going to have time with this, but I'm doing okay. It's important also to recognize that traditional Yoruba also use herbs and incantation for medicinal and magical spiritual reasons. And so what I have here is a slide of paragoon, which is an herb that is considered the master of curses. I've also put in another slide where an herb and incantation is being used in a beneficial work to have people be accepting of your words. Okay, last slide. Okay. The Awishe gave a wonderful talk yesterday on how the body, and particularly the head or re, is sacred. And in this slide, I'm not going to go over all of the aspects of Ori, but just enough of the outer head here with some of its metaphysical aspects to show how it correlates strongly with some of the Hindu philosophies with regard to chakra or the wheel of spiritual power. And here we have Atari, which is which is an area that we think corresponds with the transcending of perception of space and time. And it's often regarded as the central place of creation itself, hence the name Eleda, which some of you may be familiar with. And Eleda is also another name that we use for Olodumare, that space that makes us somewhat divine. And in Hindi traditions, this area is called the Sahasrara, or crown chakra. The Sahasrara area is believed to be associated with Shakti, one of the oldest forms of the goddess that is connected with dynamic feminine energy that is responsible for creation. I like to think of the Shakti creative energy as being similar to that as Ajay, or the terrestrial Iyele that were with Olodumare, whom Yoruba consider supreme being. And although Ajay is used in a derogatory way today, it as another name for the Awan Iyawa, our mothers, it was originally thought that Ajay was actually an arcane creative or biological, spiritual, cosmic power. You can read some of Teresa Washington's work as well as Babatunde Lawal to for greater discussion on Jade and its cosmic power. The next area is Iwaju, also called the inner eyes. Um, it embodies deep esoteric meeting points between consciousness of external world and individual consciousness. And in Hindu practices, this area is called the third eye or Ajna chakra. The Hindu believe that this area gives them the ability to communicate with the world to help them receive messages from the future as well as the past. And Ipako, finally, the area of the nape of the neck is thought to be a place that allows for the transcendence with regard to communication with the individual's mind and consciousness, Orisha, ancestors, and other higher entities, as well as energies such as Reiki and Qigong. And the Hindu also think of the Ipako area as the throat or Vishuddha chakra, which includes the tongue and mouth, ears, base of the skull. And the Hindu, like the Yoruba, believe that this area is associated with communication. I think it's instructive to note that Lukumi in the Diaspora Orisha practice called this area Eshnu Upako. And perhaps they do so because the medulla oblongata is where Eshu may reside in our Ori. And as we know, Eshu is able to communicate with everything. So let me hurry up here. And this is last slide. I just want to make some closing remarks here and to walk away with. So one thing that's important to know is that although our head or Ori is the most important Orisha, our mouths is also a divinity. And it's the most important organ of the head. And that our words have ashe or life force and can be used for good or evil. And with that, I mean that it's important. Words matter no matter how big or small. Thank you. Sorry about that. I think I went over a little.
Oh, you're fine. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Ashe fingers. Let's hit those heart reactions and other reactions to let Iya know how we appreciated that wonderful, wonderful presentation. As always, you just break it down in such a beautiful way, and it intersected so well, of course, with Baba Abimbola's presentation and all of the presentations that remind us of the importance of all of the parts of our bodies and how we use them, and the aspect of dualism in terms of the same organ, the same thing being able to both help and harm. Right. And I do want to say, because I've been asked this before when we've talked about this, that this doesn't mean silencing, right, when we need to speak, when there's something important that needs to be said, but it speaks to the aspect of, it goes back into what we often talk about with iwapele and humbleness and gentleness, where we don't need to always, right, brag about things or be saying things that are not necessary to say. Right, or say things that are not life-giving, or say things that are mean or that are cruel. And we know that we are, in a space right now where we are, where people like to do that, right? Like to be snarky and like to say things to be funny and things that are cruel or mean and that can hurt. And so thank you so much for really sharing that. And Koya, I hope that kind of taps into your question as far as, understanding that speaking when it's necessary to speak, when there's justice to be had, when there's something that is important to say is important. But also say less, right? And I love that you tapped into that. Ashe, thank you. And we will have a little bit of time for commentary and questions at the end as well. So I want to move us on to our next wonderful presenters who we're so happy to have with us again, Professor Ayodeji Ogunnaike, who teaches interdisciplinary courses on Africa and the African diaspora that center the important role religion plays in these communities. His research focuses primarily on Yoruba Orisha worship in Nigeria, but also addresses Islam in Africa, Christianity in Africa, and diaspora religions, with Brazilian candomblé being the one he studies in particular. He has studied Ifa divination with the high priest and diviner in Nigeria and has a keen interest in indigenous ways of knowing. And his current book project, Forms of Worship, How Orisha Devotion Became Religion in Nigeria and Brazil, analyzes the worship of traditional Yoruba deities originally analyzes how the worship of traditional Yoruba deities originally differed greatly from Western notions of religion, but has now eventually became the most widespread and celebrated indigenous African religion through contact with modernity and mission Christianity. He's also working on a book of a children's book, which, we love that, of Yoruba mythology with his brothers Oludamini and Olumakinde. So welcome to you, Professor Ogunnaike. We're so happy to have you with us.
Thank you so much. First and foremost, Cairo, everybody, and thank you in particular to Dr. Funlayo for inviting me to be part of this panel. I really wanted to be there in person, and it kind of broke my heart. I sent her an email and I go, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to make it. Is there any way I could participate online? And so I'm so grateful that this is an opportunity that I get to be here, at least digitally, with all of you. And interestingly enough, my presentation, which I'll try to share with all of you right now, has a lot of resonance with the previous one, which I thoroughly enjoyed. I'm going to be talking a little bit about how a kind of indigenous Yoruba response to the issue of ableism, and then the ways that the modern world tries to address it, and even the ways that it's constructed and talked about, I think has the wrong kind of ashe to it. And I think traditional or indigenous Yoruba ways of approaching it can really help us do a better job. So I'm going to be invoking a lot of the same kind of discourse and aspects of Yoruba tradition. So it's really great that these two presentations have been put together. I'd say spirit is one of the things that did it, but I'm sure it was also mediated by Dr. Funlayo. So thank you again for always getting us organized and getting the ashe flowing in all of the right ways. So I started thinking about this presentation maybe 2 or 3 years ago, before this call even came out, was at another conference that intellectually, I think, doesn't do as good of a job of conceptualizing things as the Adrissa family usually does. And someone was giving a presentation on African responses to disability. And it bothered me and a couple of other siblings who were in the room. We said, I'm not sure that disability, the English word, translates into African cultures and religious contexts. And we started asking people who spoke different African languages, how does it translate? And we had a lot of trouble coming up with a good translation for it. One of the Yoruba terms that came out was this one, abirun, which literally just means a person who is born with an illness. And of course, illness has slightly different connotations in Yoruba than it does in English. It's a bit more expensive. But disability isn't quite the same thing. Something could happen in life and you could become blind. Something could happen in life and you could lose the use of your legs. So you don't have to be born with it. And also all of these other different conditions may not necessarily be an illness. So it doesn't quite fit. But there are lots of names for specific conditions, like abuke, a hunchback, afuju, someone who's blind, aro, somebody who's lame or perhaps has difficulty walking, odi, someone who's mute, afing, a very common one, someone who is albino. And so there are terms for lots of different kind of ontological existential natures that human beings can have, but there isn't this kind of broad overarching category, especially one that has the kind of connotations that disability does. And furthermore, I started thinking, connected to Yoruba mythology, that what you might think of as a disability in the Western world isn't the fault of any individual person, or even of a collective. It's not that the parents did something wrong and now somebody's being punished by living in this condition. It's actually just the work of Orisha. So there's the very famous and well-known myth of Orisha fashioning human beings out of clay, and then Olodumare breathing Emi, or that sacred life, into them once they're finished being formed. And Orisha was working out in the hot sun, drank too much palm wine as a way to kind of cool him off and quench his thirst, got drunk, and then started forming bodies in all kinds of different ways. One leg shorter than another, eyes that were perhaps closed and didn't open, left some out to bake in the sun for a really long time, so they got a darker hue, left some in the shade, so they had a lighter hue. And then when he went to sleep, Olodumare came in and then breathed life into each and every one of them. So when he woke up and he realized that all of these different human beings had these different kinds of shapes, those that he hadn't formed in the way he initially intended had a privileged relationship with him. And he said he was going to take care of them. And so they still have a privileged status within his particular tradition. And so in that way, there's really nothing wrong, and the people haven't done anything wrong. And even their existential state isn't bad. They have a privileged relationship with the divine as a result of it. And there's a wonderful Yoruba proverb here. It's a person with buck teeth has done nothing wrong. It's the Orisha who didn't cover them with skin. Right? So there's nothing wrong with having buck teeth. It means you were made that way for one reason or the other. And it was the intention of divinity. So it's important to pay attention to that. Now, this, of course, is very different from the way the modern West addresses these types of issues. And around the time that the Western world started transitioning from the medieval period into the Renaissance and the modern era, it got this particular idea of one human ideal that's very similar to kind of Platonic form. So that's where it had its root. And you can see the Vitruvian man drawn by Leonardo da Vinci here, is that there's a singular model, just one of them, against which everything is measured. So this is what the ideal human being was supposed to look like, according to Leonardo da Vinci, and medical practices started getting developed along those lines. Of course, sexism and racism have resulted in this human norm or anatomical norm being explicitly male and white, which has had all kinds of horrible repercussions for the medical system, for beauty standards, even in education, and a whole lot of other ways. And if you think about it, if the idea of what health is, or a healthy body is inherently gendered male and racialized to be white, if you have any other kind of identity, the practice of medicine in attempting to restore health is actually trying to fit your anatomy into a category that doesn't work for you at all. And we see this over and over again in the health disparities between men and women, between Black people and white people, and then especially with Black women in the American medical system. And it's a direct result of this kind of philosophy of what it means to be human and what it means to be healthy. That's very much at odds with African sensibilities, in some ways very antagonistic to it. So any deviation from this perceived and idealized norm was viewed as a lack or a deficiency. And so it's not, oh, that you're different, it's that, oh, you're lacking. You don't have what you need to be fully human or fully healthy. And this actively militates against diversity and undergirds this idea of disability, meaning a human being is supposed to be able. And so if you are not able in a particular way, however that's defined, you're lacking, you're deficient, you're disabled. For the Yoruba, this isn't at all the way that you think about it. So a person's existential or existence or character, Iwa, is modeled after either an individual or sometimes also a familial Orisha. And there are 201, 401, 1401 different Orisha, which is just an infinite number, and then there's always one more. So that means there can't be just one model. There are about as many models out there as you could possibly imagine. And each and every one of them has their own particular kind of ashe. And for all of the different Orisha, each one of them has their own particular kinds of limitations, or you could call them flaws. I wouldn't want to use that word necessarily. But Orunmila, for example, is sometimes depicted in Ifa mythology as not being able to walk, or sometimes having no bones, and he's carried around by other people. Oshun is very self-conscious about the size of her ears, despite being, the representation of beauty. And so she covers her ears all the time with her head wrap. She got into conflict with her co-wife, Oba, and Oba cut off her own ear to put it in the stew of their husband. And now Oba is very angry with Oshun all the time and usually covers her right ear, just like you can see in the picture here. Shango, sorry, this is misspelled, but Shango has bloodshot eyes that he's very self-conscious about. He doesn't like people talking about them or drawing attention to them. And depending on how you hear the myths, sometimes Oya, sometimes Yemoja have only one breast. And sometimes they're self-conscious about that as well. Osai sometimes has a shriveled leg or one leg that's shorter than another. Sometimes he has to walk around with a cane because he's not fully ambulatory. And Shokwana or Obaluaye Omolu has pockmarked skin as a result of living perpetually in a state of infection with smallpox, which again isn't necessarily a bad thing and enables him to do all kinds of other things, but that's just the way that he is. His skin is atypical. And so another Yoruba proverb that came to mind when thinking about all of this is Onakan Waja, that there's more than one road into the market, right? The market is where everybody's heading, but there's more than one way to do it. And if you try to get everybody in the same road, it's not going to work out as well. And so from the Yoruba perspective, existential variation is really a source of strength, not of deficiency. And this is one of my favorite proverbs here. Malu tionu it's like a cow who doesn't have a tail can trust God to swat all of the flies. So a perceived lack is actually really an opening or an invitation for divine action and manifestation in a way that wouldn't be possible with just common human abilities. And one of my favorite, Ijakba, the Yoruba trickster tortoise, one of my favorite stories about him, and I'll have to condense it or just tell the relevant part here. He ran off this woman who had a hunchback off of his farm because he didn't want her collecting firewood there. But the person who had a farm just across the road kindly welcomed her in, helped her collect firewood, tied it up in a bundle, helped her set it on her head to go sell it in the market. And after doing this for days and days and days, the woman kindly invited the man to scratch her back because she said there'd be something in it for him. And he said, "Oh, mama, of course I'll do it, but you don't need to give me anything." And she said, no, just scratch my back and you'll see what happened. He scratched her back, and then it opened up, and very expensive glass beads and cowrie shells and velvet cloth and all kinds of expensive, very valuable items started pouring out and made the man fabulously wealthy. And the idea with this myth is that what looks different or perhaps not valuable at first, if you treat it properly over time, you'll realize that there's something inside it that you never would have imagined, and that will bless you beyond what you might possibly have expected. And so these different existential positions and abilities offer new flows of ashe and thus new possibilities that couldn't have existed if the ashe hadn't been redirected by that shifting of abilities or of even physical nature or anatomy. So I think our responses to the kind of incredible variation in human anatomy is very much conditioned by our kind of philosophies and worldviews. So another Yoruba proverb, if God is doing good, or when God is doing good, we say God is doing evil. And so the question from the Yoruba perspective is not what is lacking, but rather what has been gained or what new possibilities does this condition represent? And this is represented by another proverb about Olorun. Bi Olorun ba Banilori, afi rungondibore. If God makes one bald, God puts a beard in its place, right? The hair is moved from one part of the body, but that means it's been redirected or repositioned somewhere else. And you can see that beautifully with this depiction of Orishanla there. So that's the traditional Yoruba way of approaching it. And I think this is a wonderful way to respond to the issue of ableism, which is a very real problem that we have all over the world, but especially in the modern world, and we have to address it. But I think if we don't change the philosophical underpinnings or the cosmological worldview, you end up creating a response that's just the other side of the same coin. So without a single ideal or norm, difference doesn't have to become deficiency. And if what Olodumare, Olorun, God, or the Orisha have done is good, trying to force it into another model or mold may in fact be evil, or at least contrary to the will and the nature, the ashe, of all of those transcendent beings. And we don't want to be on that side of things at all. So the alternative approach, inspired by a Yoruba worldview, can be to identify and tap into unique abilities rather than striving for equal access to an already established norm. And so I'm all for ensuring that we have closed captions when we have videos and presentations. We should absolutely have elevators that ensure that everyone can get to whatever level of a floor they need to with as much ease as possible. But I think there's a real problem in setting up one particular way of living as a universal norm and then trying to ensure that everyone can behave in that way and saying that, oh, well, we need to go to extra lengths to make sure you can operate just like a normal human being. In fact, what we should be saying is, okay, you don't do things the way everybody else does. But what does that mean you get to do that everyone else isn't able to do? And what kind of special role do you have in the collective or in the society as a result of that? So otherwise, I think we risk rejecting the gifts or the ori, the divine identity and destiny of each individual, which has been chosen from Orun in heaven. And it can also create a poor self-image, right, of internalizing this idea of deficiency and working against one's natural ashe. And then I think collective loss. And I have this picture of Ray Charles here because he lost his sight as a young man. And he himself says there's no way he would have become as gifted of a musician if the kind of internal ashe he had wasn't redirected toward working with and understanding sound. And that would have been a huge loss for humanity as a whole, and not just for Ray Charles himself. And so this is a kind of Yoruba way of looking at it, that yes, it might have looked like Olorun Olodumare had done something evil when he lost his sight. But in fact, something really good was happening. And if we can learn to scratch, be patient with, be generous to, and create a place for that kind of existential situation, and then scratch it, just like was done in the Jakba story, then we never know what might come out of it as a result of it. Something that would never have happened otherwise if we just try to treat everybody as fitting into the same mold. So I'll stop there because I think I might be just about running out of time or just a bit over, but thank you everybody for listening, and I look forward to questions afterward at the end.
Beautiful, beautiful. I say fingers, reactions, give thanks, Dr. Ogunnaike, always bringing it, always bringing it. That was absolutely fabulous. I think it could be expanded in so many ways, and so wonderfully resonant as well with the presentations, too, particularly the ones that originally you were grouped with, that spoke about, the presentation on hoodoo and disability narratives, and talking about what could be gained, right, from variations in form. And then also our sibling Ifashina, who works on accessible movement, who, talks about changing that language, just as you said, around not modifications, but variations, right? Not thinking about one particular norm of which we are modified, but that we are so varied in all of our different forms and abilities, and also thinking about what is to be gained, right? What is to be gained in every situation? Not is this happening to me, as we often say, but why has this happened for me? What is it that I'm meant to gain from it? Give thanks. Many, many ways into the marketplace, and the Ashe of Orisha is in our mouths. Ashe Orisha Lenumio. Ashe Orisha Lenumi, Ashe. Thank you so much. The Ashe of Orisha is truly, truly, truly in your mouth, and we give thanks for you sharing it with us. We are moving along to our next presenter, who we're so happy to have with us, who is Elmina Bell. And Elmina hails from Indigenous African parents from the Indigenous Sawa Bantu peoples of Cameroon and Central Africa and the Ewe peoples of Togo. Through genealogy, mediumship work, and history studies, Elmina has also connected to ancestors and family in other regions of Africa and as well the island of Hispaniola. She was raised in DC, where she's now based, and is multiply neurodivergent person who centers Indigenous holistic psychologies and cosmologies for improved health, community building, and the dismantling of oppressive colonial capitalistic systems. Their work as a trauma-informed peer support facilitator, crisis counselor, tropical and sidereal astrologer, sound healer, and medium is guided by Mulema alchemy, which they'll talk more about here in this presentation. MulemaNgoma, activating holistic healing and interdependent communal care responsibilities with the mentally and physically disabled. Elmina, blessings and welcome.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, and thank you for organizing this conference. My webcam on my computer has been acting up, so I'm doing video on my phone and sharing screen from my computer. I'm not sure if there's a way to pin both of these so people can see if that's possible. If not, it's okay. We can just show this the screen version with the screen version of me. It's the computer version of me is the part of me that doesn't have the video. That's where I'm going to be sharing the PowerPoint from. Okay. So for the sake of time, I skipped a couple of slides, but I'm going to send the link so Iya can share it with everybody and check later. But I wanted to start this presentation with this passage from Ancestor Malidoma Patrice Somme's book, of the Healing Wisdom of Africa, where he's talking about how indigenously people with psychological crises are perceived, or people with neuro disabilities may be perceived, right? And how it is seen as those people interacting heavily with the other world, which he sometimes calls the invisible world and the spiritual realm, and how there's actually a lot of respect for that. And throughout his books, he talks about community responsibilities. And in this instance, he's talking about the fact that sometimes a psychological crisis is happening because a person is not able to live out their gifts. And what gifts are being lost to the community? And in today's modern context in the Western world, what is the community doing to ensure that one another's gifts get honored, right? Are we seeing children grow up and putting them into boxes about what kind of careers they have or what kind of things they have to do? Or are we letting them be themselves, right? Because that's where it starts. That's where the disconnect starts, right? And so it's incumbent upon parents, teachers, and then we get into systems, right? Schools, hospitals, and all these things that are also teaching us about interconnectedness that impact our health. And I wanted to tap into communality and communal values a lot for this presentation. And I think the heart space brings us there. The heart is what we use to be able to listen to others, to care for others, to love for others. And Mulema means heart in my parents' languages. And Goma, it means drum or rhythm in a lot of Bantu languages across Africa. And so listening to our rhythms and what we are here to do, what our purposes are and what our gifts are, is something that has been suppressed. Listening and caring for other people, which we also use our heart to do, because our rhythms are all interconnected, right? If somebody doesn't do their part or do their rhythm, the song's going to be off, right? Everybody has their role to play. And so I wanted to put some connections between the disability justice movement and Indigenous African values. You can see here, I'm not going to go through all of them, people can read this, but you can see here that, please press the slideshow button. Thank you. Yes, that'll make it bigger. Thank you, whoever mentioned that. you can see here that there's a lot of communal values, right? It says collective access, interdependence, wisdom that our ancestors understood, which is balancing your individual uniqueness with the collectivity of the group, rather than going into the extremes of hyper independence or codependency, which is what our society is basically on, because capitalism, colonization promotes that hyper individualism, you know? And so these are gains that people in disability justice spaces are naming. These are just some of them, right? Thank you for mentioning, the previous speaker mentioned subtitles, and I'm happy that they made that available. You all made that available as an option for these Zoom presentations. I noticed that yesterday to help deaf people to read what's going on. Adding image descriptions to our Instagram posts and social media, if there's a picture, adding a description so that the deaf people can have it read to them, you know. Medical gaslighting, speaking up about their needs and being told by doctors you're not making sense. And these also happen among people who may not necessarily be disabled, but are classified as disabled subliminally because they are not the cis het white cultural norm. This can happen with your race, your weight, and your gender, right? COVID safety protocols, right? Right now, the emergency of COVID is being ended. That will mean that free tests will no longer be available. That'll mean harder access to masks and things that people who are immunocompromised need to have access to spaces, to have access to events. This is also affecting their insurance and their benefits, and they need support and advocating for this. And more people are getting disabled because of COVID. The statistics are showing that long COVID disabilities are happening, right? Disability justice needs are also coming from the mental health disabilities, which is more my area, of understanding the abuse that happens because of being differently, of thinking differently or communicating differently in the mind and the psych wards. Here on the left of the screen, we have an image of Over Otieno, who was unfortunately killed recently in a Virginia psych ward. And it was very reminiscent of George Floyd. I'm just going to put a trigger warning here for those who may click the article later. There is video attached to that. But these are things that many people don't know about, right? In terms of disabilities and trying to communicate with or listen to the needs of disability justice people, because they've been invisibilized. People with disabilities have been erased from society, right? They are not really, we're not getting a lot of representation in education or in media or anywhere. And the invisible world can refer to things that's not visible to the physical, available to the physical eye, but it can also refer to spiritual things, conceptualizations of the mind, and that we're connected to. And so this here, I wanted to play this clip really quickly of ancestor Gil Scott Heron.
The revolution wasn't televised in the 60s. Is it going to be televised in the 90s?
Well, you know, the catchphrase, what that was all about, the revolution will not be televised. That was about the fact that the first change that takes place is in your mind. You have to change your mind before you change the way you live and the way you move. So when we said that the revolution will not be televised, we were saying that, like, that the thing that's going to change people is something that no one will ever be able to capture on film. It'll just be something that you see, and all of a sudden you realize, I'm on the wrong page, or I'm on the right page, but I'm on the wrong note. And I've got to get in sync with everyone else to understand what.
So there he's talking about how it's important to.
The revolution wasn't televised in the 60s.
He's talking about how it's important for us to tap into our listening skills, right? Of what, and that's what's needed for the revolution. And the activation from that comes from the spiritual realm. It's not something that can be televised on the TV. The spark in your mind that lets you know, okay, something's wrong, and I need to be listening to what the community and people who are not being treated properly are going through, right? And so in my mother's language, we don't really have a word for open-minded. And the word for open-minded, you would say, is an open-hearted person. because we don't have these separations between logic and the heart and the emotions and this. It's all the same thing. You think with your heart, right? That's how you do that. And that starts from the spiritual realm. That's not something that is always tangible, right? And so whenever revolution happens, healing also happens. So I just wanted to name a couple of things here. I've noticed that a lot of the way people use the word boundaries these days, it's moved away from its original intent, especially when it comes to people with disabilities or people who are different. And people are just kind of casting them aside because we are seen as undesirable, right? Even me, I mentioned, and it was mentioned in my intro that I'm multiply neurodivergent and neuroexpansive. I've been diagnosed with bipolar 2. That's what the Western world calls it. My ancestors didn't call that, but that's what it's called. I have also been diagnosed with ADHD by the Western world, and also I've done a lot of research on autism as well that I've noticed with African spirituality and autism. I'm not going to get into that today, but I'm just giving that to share my background. But anyway, there's this philosophy that I think really supports the Ubuntu concept of I am because we are in community work called Mbongi, right? Which literally translates to learning space, community, room, a house without walls or barriers or boundaries, where we can take those down to be able to listen to each other, critique each other, and learn from one another and create solutions, creatively. I learned this from my the elders over at Association of Black Psychologists, who've been doing research on Indigenous African spiritual psychology for decades now. And I think that it's really important for us to, again, tap into the heart, which is, I put this quote here by Ancestor Maladon Some again, about, this is from a different book, but still related to these concepts, about the heart as a place of bringing people home. And each member of the community having a role in this body that we're actually sharing, which is the world, which is the earth, the spiritual realms. We all cohabit that as one, right? And we're different legs of that one. And everyone has to be able to listen to each other and communicate to each other in order for things to run. So in terms of communal values, helping people with disabilities feel seen, we see here Ancestor Sabonfu Some is talking about the importance of sharing gifts with the community and the negative impact it has when you don't have that, right? And this is interdependence in action, you know. So this is just another quote here. I don't know if y'all can hear that, but I made that to with Ancestor Barbara Sizemore. She says, "I'm not giving up my individual rights to fight for the group." That's not what it's all about. She's mocking people, right? And she says, the Constitution gives you individual rights, but you can only protect them as a group. I don't know why I was freezing on my end. So I went to the next slide, but I'm sure I shared that quote because we see a lot of people being like, oh, those people are crazy. That's not my problem. You know, it's very much like, I have my right to have my space, and this person who may be having, you know, a mental episode, who may actually need communal care, who may actually need an Indigenous spiritual practitioner who has the range to engage with the other world, with the spiritual world that that person is seeing, right? And what can we do to get those supports to them? That's what we should be doing, rather than being like, oh, this is my boundary and I don't have to listen to them. They are, you know, crazy, right? Or, oh, these people who are disabled, they're always complaining about something. They want captions, they want this, they want masks, they want all of these things, right? And thinking about what they have to go through on a daily basis, right? Being disabled, and the comparison of the inconvenience of you as a community member versus the daily challenges that they have to deal with because our community structures are not there for them, right? Our systems, our institutions are not there for them. Interdependence also comes in, is related to our relationship with spirits, right? Being connected to spirits in the spiritual realm. And there were occurrences of many people, and I was one of them, having insights that was kind of warning us. Preventative medicine, divination, this is central to our holistic healing systems and central to helping people with disabilities and preventing illness. And that's important to think about, that that's scientific as well. Lemongrass was shown to me in a dream about 3 weeks before I had to get on a plane to leave Florida, where I was living in Florida, to come here. And I researched it, realized it helps with, keeping your immune system up and all those things. So we have to be attentive to these signs. So skipping over this. So neuroexpansiveness was developed by Ngazi Alston. And that term is used to refer to, it's used to refer to Black people's minds and how we are beyond these Western limitations of what's considered normal behavior. 1 minute, thank you. And so I wanted to share these ancestors who had, and this will be my last, I have one more slide after this with Harriet Tubman, and that will be my last slide, and the rest of it people can read later. I wanted to share the quotes from these ancestors who all had mental disabilities. And from a Western standpoint, Ancestor Nina Simone had bipolar disorder and schizophrenia and PTSD. And she talked about, the numbness that goes on, the emotional suppression that happens in our society, and how that can negatively affect us as a people. And also this need to have a certain order and want everyone to be standardized and the same, and that's not realistic. And that's why there are challenges with the diagnostic statistical manual that psychologists use, and Black psychologists have named these limitations, right? That those don't really accurately reflect our conditions. They reflect white norms, right? That want you to suppress who you are. And ancestor Marsha P. Johnson, she was a trans gay rights activist, and she experienced what the Western world calls psychosis, which there's not really a word for that in Indigenous cultures, because that word means someone who was out of touch with reality. But we understand from an Indigenous perspective, there's many layers to reality beyond the physical eye. They also would fluctuate and have episodes and fluctuate between Malcolm and Marsha. They're two different identities, right? And we know that in a lot of Indigenous African traditions, we have multiple spirits in our body. We have multiple reflections of who we are. And again, because our capitalistic colonial society has been cut off from the spiritual literacy tools that can help us to streamline these connections, a lot of people with these predispositions to a lot of connections to the other realm can struggle. And Ancestor Harriet Tubman, they had narcolepsy. They would also see things and visions that other people were not seeing. They also had a head injury when they were a child that affected their brain. And I wanted to share this quote by a psychiatrist. He says, "To be clear, I don't want to romanticize madness, but without sublime madness, there is no Harriet Tubman crazy enough to return some 13 times to the slave territory to free more slaves. Without sublime madness, we will accept the reality that capital trumps life and we will go extinct," right? And so all three of these ancestors, they weren't just activists or revolutionaries. They were the ones who took the most risk, right? They took a lot of risk. Nina Simone took a lot of risk in her songs with the things she would say. She even said one day to Ancestor MLK, Dr. King, that she is not nonviolent, right? These are things that was very controversial to do. And that energy from the spirit realm that is moving through these people, that is guiding them and pushing them to do these things, is something that also has to be looked at. And I'm young, gifted, and Black, and my soul is intact. And I want to end on that note, that being disabled, I feel from an Indigenous African perspective, is not having access to your gifts, not having access to community, and not having access to allow your soul to be who it really is meant to be. So I'll keep it there. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Ashe fingers, reactions. Give thanks for that wonderful, wonderful, wonderful presentation with beautiful intersections Again, I love that without, we have to have a touch of madness. I must be a little mad, right? All of us have to have that touch of what is, we have to have that in order to be able to imagine something that has never been imagined before, in order to be able to push back against the forces of oppression that have been normalized and that we have been taught to accept, to be able to envision something that has not been envisioned before, and to really believe that we are strong and powerful enough to bring it into reality. And we do that in community, right? We inspire others to join and take it in with us. And so just wonderful, young, gifted, and Black, and our souls are intact. We give thanks. We give thanks for that. And it's beautiful intersections as well with our next presenter, who is Dr. LaQuawn Hinton. She is an assistant professor of disability studies and Black literature and culture in the English department at the University of North Texas. She's also a public relations director for the College Language Association, an organization founded in 1937 by a group of Black scholars and educators of English and world languages. And she's a member of the Committee for Persons with Disabilities for the city of Denton, Texas. She has published about disability in regard to constructions of Black motherhood, masculinity and hip hop, spaces of incarceration, reproductive justice in literature, and spiritual practice as technology. She is a disabled queer mama Black feminist who, as Alice Walker said, loves music, loves dance, loves the moon, loves the spirit, loves food and roundness, loves struggle, loves the folk, and is striving to love herself regardless. And her presentation today is Refusing to be Made Whole, Centering the Black Spirit in Disability Studies through Black Women's Writing. Welcome, Dr. Hinton.
All right. First and foremost, I want to thank everyone for being here. I want to thank the presenters that have gone thus far. I thank you for your patience. As you can tell that I've been ill and I couldn't go in person like I initially intended to, and I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to speak today. And I've been praying about it. And then when I initially didn't see that my name was off the program, I was like, let me go ahead and try. And so I'm here today. And it is such a blessing that the people who came before me because they did much of the groundwork that I needed to have done for y'all to come up and show up with me where I am now for my argument and the work that I'm about to do. So just spirit shows up and does what needs to be done so we can show up, right? And so the work that I am presenting from for you today is a little bit from my book in progress. Well, it's finished. I just need to turn it into the publisher. So y'all also pray about that as well, because they're expecting it. And it is, the general title is Refusing to be Made Whole, Disability in Contemporary Black Women's Writing. But for this presentation, I focused on centering the Black spirit in disability studies for women's writing, specifically to broaden our understanding of disability studies movements by looking at the work that Black women writers have done in theorizing the disabled body, particularly through African cosmologies. And so I want to start off with this reading of Toni K. Bambara's, one of our mad ancestors, The Salt Eaters, her first novel, to get us into this discussion. So in Bambara's novel, The Salt Eaters, she opens with a protagonist, Velma Henry, on a stool, passed out after attempting suicide by taking pills and putting her head in an oven. She is being treated at the Academy of the Seven Healing Arts Southwest Community Infirmary, a multiracially and ethnically owned
and operated institution that combines biomedical treatments and healing practices from various non-Western cultures. Velma is surrounded by interns there to observe and learn, as well as doctors and a select group of community members known as the 12, or the Master's Mind. Also present and central to Velma's treatment team is folk healer and conjurer, Minnie Ramson. While Ransom is there to support and guide her out of her stupor, it is Velma who must work through the trauma that led her to suicide in the first place. A disintegrating marriage, strained family life, an unfulfilling career, burdensome activist work, and constant acts of violent noir, a specific form of racism and sexism that Black women face. Thank you for letting me know that my PowerPoint did not share. There we go. And let me hit present. Okay. Additionally, Velma is confused and frightened by her burgeoning spiritual powers. Like many Black women, Velma has been physically, mentally, and spiritually broken by a racist and sexist society, which is compounded by, as the novel suggests, a predisposition to depression and neurodivergency. Illness and healing for Velma is multifaceted. Illness involves a complex matrix of societal and interpersonal harms, as well as natural body, mind, spirit diversity. Healing involves attending to Velma's acute injuries, prioritizing her mental health by balancing her responsibilities and not overburdening herself, accepting and adjusting to her spiritual powers, and participating in a larger effort to make a seismic shift away from a world rampant with hate towards Black women. Ransom and the other healers envisage Velma's wholeness as crucial for not only self-actualization, but also communal uplift in the struggle to save a world on the verge of apocalypse. In other words, treatment is not an individualized biomedical experience, but a collective striving for wellness of body, mind, and spirit. Healing is not meant to reproduce the normate body, what disability studies scholar Rosemary Garland Thompson has identified as the idealized subject, only emergent through its contrast with those who have stigmatized attributes. But healing is meant to equip people with the wellness needed to fight for a more just world. And so I argue that many Black women and Black women writers, like Bambara, present becoming disabled as a traumatic and often violent experience of Black womanhood in their essay, in their life writing, in their fiction. I would also add in their tweets, Facebook posts, TikTok videos, you name it. The material consequences of misogynoir are vitally written on the Black woman's body, mind, and spirit. Nevertheless, Black women, we embrace disabled Black womanhood by turning to African and African diasporic spiritual understandings of wholeness. These writers, these women often appeal to a mix of ATRs and ADRs and Indigenous American belief systems that understand debilitating injury and illness as not only physical and mental, but also spiritual, as not just an individual problem, but a symptom of communal discord. These spiritual belief systems, reclaimed and revised by these women writers, have more complex and capacious understandings of the body, sickness, and wellness. Thus, Black women use their belief systems to reimagine healing in ways that make space for a variety of body, mind, spirits. In so doing, these writers frustrate the tendency to equate healing with cure and wholeness with a return to the normate body. I maintain that disability is not only a major theme in contemporary Black women's writing and thought, but that it also shapes the formal elements and characteristics of our literary tradition. The dialogic, recursive, open-ended, cyclical nature of Black women's writing results from a way of knowing and being that not only refuses wholeness of body and mind, but also narrative. As a field, African-American literary studies has produced a robust body of theory and criticism about the sick, injured, maimed, brutalized, and traumatized Black female body, mind, spirit. Scholars like Horton Spiller, Rebecca Wanzo, Deborah King, and Tamika Carey identify how misogyny is violently and physically inscribed on Black men's body spirits. As Rebecca Wanzo asserts, the play of domination is continually imprinted on Black women's bodies, and the nexus of identity and pain is continually shaping Black female identity. Misogyny is not only physically and mentally damaging, but it is the process of becoming injured as a result of misogyny that seems to be a foundational experience of Black womanhood, particularly in the US. And so drawing on theories and methods from disability studies, I read the broken body, mind, spirit in Black women's literature, particularly in writing as a disability, particularly because the field of disability exposes and challenges the expectations and attitudes and assumptions we have about bodies. And I find it particularly useful that disability studies reconfigures definitions of disability from a tragic flaw and dysfunction of the body, mind, spirit that should be treated and ideally cured through biomedical intervention, which is the medical model of disability. And one that understands that we need to challenge societal expectations and oppression, and understands that disability is a complex interaction among bodies, environments, and oppressions, typically understood as the social model of disability. And that within this frame, disability is no longer a fact of the body. Instead, it's produced by inaccessible environments, institutionalized stigma, and political disenfranchisement. As such, critical disability scholars not only theorize bodies with traits typically considered a disability, such as limb difference, sensory difference, and mobility impairments, but it also considers how one's body, able-bodied or disabled, shapes experiences, thoughts, and beliefs, as well as cultural production and politics. Disability studies identifies and challenges ableism, the preference for the able body and mind, as an institutionalized and systemic practice of oppression, informative and informed by other oppressive ideologies and practices like racism and heterosexism. In other words, whether or not you identify as disabled, ableism comes to bear on your lives, as we all are implicated in normalizing processes. But for those of us racialized as Black, this is particularly the case, as historically Blackness has been constructed as a disability, as a form of body-mind difference in contradistinction to whiteness, which is typically has been represented as healthy and able-bodied, and that particular model as upheld as ideal. And in my larger project, I go into a little more detail, drawing on Black theorists about the ways that racism has interplayed in also shaping the material Black body as disabled. But for purposes of time, I want to zoom in on this quote from Horton Spillers, where she says in her now foundational essay, Mama's Baby, Papa's Maybe, the anatomical specifications of rupture of altered human tissue take on the adjective description of laboratory prose: eyes being out, arms, back, skulls branded, a left jaw, a right angle punctured, teeth missing, as the calculated work of iron, whips, chains, knives, the canine patrol, the bullet. These indecipherable markings on the captive body render a kind of hieroglyphics of the flesh whose severe distinctions come to be hidden to the cultural scene by skin color. And what I take from that is that I want to share with y'all is the idea that racism physically marks and injures the Black body, minds, and spirits. And we see this in the numbers and the statistics of disabled Black people, even as we are rhetorically situated as disabled in a negative term. But rather than disavowing disability, it's important that we reject ableist narratives, which I contend, as other people have suggested, are largely white and Western, because when we understand that, and I'm quoting Christina Sharp here, the violence of anti-Blackness produces Black existence, we must recognize, in order to politically mobilize, this anti-Black violence as disabling. At the same time, as Brittany Cooper asserts, if Black feminism hopes to be impactful to broad swaths of Black women and people, particularly those outside of the academy, that's the space I'm within, then it must forthrightly begin to attend to questions of the spiritual and sacred. And I argue this is work that Black women have been doing already. And I turn to their writing to excavate this work that they're doing, and particularly by drawing on Black spiritual systems. And so in these women's writing, you often see really specific systems such as Vadun, and others syncretized into this kind of hybrid spiritual system, but they take away really central core beliefs. And here are just a few of them that I'll go through quickly, once again, for the sake of time. And so once again, thank you for those who have laid down how these beliefs actually play out in the different systems. But when they've articulated the emphasis on community and interconnection, this is particularly important as we think about the ways that Black community is constantly under attack. And so when we think about bodies, moving away from a biomedical system is especially important because it individualizes illness, injury, and disability, when really it's a community problem, or those are not the problem itself, but we as a community are facing violence that are producing these problems. And healing's only going to come through interconnection. There's a wonderful quote in The Salt Eaters, the novel that I analyzed before, that explains this, particularly the use of healing. Healing is not just for ourselves, but it's so that we can also reach out and heal the community. And one of the healers in that text said, "And did you think your life is yours alone to do with as you please? That I, your folks, your family, and all those who care for you have no say in the matter?" Whoop. So no, they really theorize how disability and healing must be community and interconnected, and resist Western notions of individual bodies and spirits under medical treatment. As such, they also draw on cosmologies that view the body, mind, spirit as diverse and divinity as diverse. And so once again, giving thanks to those who have already laid that out, so I don't have to, but in their writing, you see them identifying, calling on, invoking and evoking spirits whose bodies in many ways speak to their own. So for instance, with Sister Audre Lorde, she draws on many one-breasted Orisha as she came to terms with her own mastectomy that left her one-breasted. So my time is running out. In their writing, they emphasize the power of the word Nomo and Ashe. And as such, their writing is not just stories, they're not just essays meant to inform, to motivate us, but they are acts of healing in themselves. In reading their works, we as readers, we become healed, and this is drawing on the work of Valerie Lee, but also they wrote to speak and heal themselves. So many of these writers, Toni Cade-Barrow, Audre Lorde, June Jordan, they write about how when they were writing their essays and their books, they didn't know that they were going to need that word later on as they dealt with cancer and with other illnesses. And as such, and by drawing on these, they believe in the continuation of life, because the reality is what also debilitates Black bodies has often been what ends Black life, at least in the traditional sense. And I think one of the most important parts of my work is broadening our conversations about Black death. It's important that we acknowledge the injustice of life taken too soon and so violently. But I think it's also important that as we envision liberation and the kind of work that we do, that we draw on these women who understood that as ancestors, they will continue to guide and lead this work, that the work that they're doing through the word will continue to help heal us as individuals and as communities. And so I'm going to end there. And I thank you all.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hinton. And we are also, of course, sending you immense healing vibes. We hope that sharing this community space with us is helping to heal and uplift you. And we give thanks for those beautiful, beautiful reflections. And again, just beautifully intersecting with so much of what has been said. And we thank you for that. Very much in alignment, we are very excited to have our final speaker for this panel, who is Jade T. Perry. And we are honored to have Jade with us today. Jade is a Black, queer, disabled femme writer, educator, interdisciplinary artist, and mystic. She is the co-founder and co-director of the Mystic Soul Project, which seeks to cultivate and grow a new generation of Black, brown, queer, and trans people of color as wisdom keepers of spirituality, activism, and healing. She's also the owner of a spiritual development and life coaching business with programs such as the Cecilia Western Spiritual Academy. Jade has extensive training at the intersections of social justice and higher education, and teaching experience with kindergartners through adult and lifetime learners. She mixes disciplines to contribute resources, art, and experiential learning opportunities that aid in the holistic healing processes of Black folk, queer, and trans people of color, and disabled and/or chronically ill folks within these communities. And she will be speaking to us on reimagining hybrid spiritual communities through Black feminist thought, Afro-Spiritual archetypes, and disability justice praxis. Welcome, Jade.
Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. And thank you, Dr. Fulayo, for not just inviting me here, but also really engaging this topic at such a timely moment. And I thank all of you for being here with me and sharing in this moment. I thank all of the presenters who went before. You'll see some heavy overlap and some things kind of ducking and dodging in and out. So I'm very excited to kind of expound upon some of those points and add in some of my own for this learning gumbo that we're creating here today. In my presentation, you'll see opportunities where it says chat. And those are just questions and thoughts that I'm posing that you can answer in the chat so that we can really make this a polyrhythmic learning experience across time and space. So I'm going to share my screen with you. And I'm going to assume that people can see something. Okay, I'm seeing some head nods, so thank you for letting me know that all is well. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about reimagining. So we're going to be using our imagination, reimagining hybrid spiritual communities through these three things, right? Black feminist thought, Afro-Spiritual archetypes, and disability justice practice. These are three different disciplines. So please know that when you're getting in this learning experience, you're getting the cake pop version and not the 4-layer cake. And so we're going to enjoy it anyway, any which way, okay? So when I say hybrid, reimagining hybrid spiritual communities, and you can look to Dr. Fulayo's work to kind of see some of this hybrid. This conference is a hybrid conference. So when I'm talking about hybrid, I'm talking about the spaces, forums, courses, communities that exist both on and offline, particularly in this ongoing era of the COVID-19 pandemic. But when I'm talking about hybridity, I'm also talking about just the way we get down as people of the Black diaspora, the energetic teacher of Black diasporic spiritual systems as practiced in the New World and under otherwise oppressive and disabling physical and spiritual forces. And Dr. Hinton already talked about racism as an inherently disabling experience. So Black folks across the diaspora and in the New World have had to become hybrid, as in hoodoo includes the hybridity of practices across geography and history. You'll see these little footnotes, 1, 2, 3, 4. If you're really feeling something and you want to dive deeper into it, write down what the footnote is, and then you can take a screenshot of the resources at the end so you can go a little bit deeper with each of these concepts. But I think it's important for you to know how I'm entering this topic. I'm a Black, queer, disabled femme, and I always put those things together because I don't see them as operating in isolation from one or the other. I am a churchy mystic. I am not Christian. I want to be clear. I'm not Christian, but I am a churchy mystic, and I'm working on some auto theory and biomyth around how Black folks saw mysticism and Afro-diasporic spirituality through the lens of the charismatic church. The mission of my work is to contribute these things. And the mission of my work is to aid in holistic healing processes. And as a Black, queer, disabled femme, I've had to do this in very hybrid ways. So I'm not just telling you what I think. I'm not just telling you what I researched. I'm telling you what I know. I'm telling you what I've lived. And so I'm hoping that you can receive some of these things. The flow for this presentation, first, we're going to talk about the need to reimagine hybrid spiritual communities. Why do we need to do this, right? We're going to talk about why first. How? By disentangling from ableism. How? By prioritizing wellness over cure. How? By looking towards Black feminist Afro-spiritual archetypes. How? By rooting best practices in disability justice principles. So we want to do our reimagining through these 4 different portals. Why do we need to reimagine hybrid spiritual communities? This is from a Pew Research study. They did this 2019 and 2020, meaning that we were on the cusp of the pandemic, in the beginning of the pandemic, and then this research was produced in 2021 during the pandemic. And what they found was that 21% of Black Americans say they are religiously unaffiliated, meaning that the majority of us are religiously affiliated one way or another. But yet, out of these, the 21%, 94% of Black adults in this category say they believe in some kind of higher power. 60% say they pray at least a few times a month. And then 40%, and this really applies to us here, 40% believe that prayers to ancestors can protect them from harm. So these are folks who are not religiously affiliated. They don't have any affiliation, but yet they're in prayer. They're thinking about the divine, and they're thinking about ancestral work and practices. So we also have to become hybrid, looking at what is actually going on at this time. Why reimagine hybrid spiritual communities through Black feminist thought specifically? I'll tell you why. Because out of religious and non-religious Black Americans on opposing sexism, Pew Research found that 73% of the members from non-Christian faiths thought it was important to oppose sexism. Not just important, but it was also a spiritual practice to oppose sexism. Yes. So we have to have some Black feminist thought if we're going to create hybrid spiritual communities, when we know that 73% of the Black Americans who are going to be in those spaces believe that it is an important spiritual principle to oppose sexism. Yes. So you can see the breakdown of all the different kind of numbers, and you'll see it's in the 70s for each of these different groups. So please put in the chat, in what ways have you experienced shifts in spiritual community building in these years, 2019, 2020, 2021, right? This is when this research was done. So if you would like to share, if you're creating spiritual communities, if you're in elays, if you're in churches, if you're online, let me know. I'm interested to know how you have experienced shifts in spiritual community building in these, years. How do we create hybrid spiritual communities? First, by disentangling from the ableist impulse. Talila A. Lewis Esquire talks about the non-responses to the pandemic and how they've illustrated how system, society, and people use fitness and health and wellness as factors to determine who is worth, accommodations and who is not, who is worth, putting the elevator in the building, who is worth building the ramp for, who is worth wearing the mask for, and who is not. And so from that, they updated, this is my favorite definition of ableism, and I'm going to read it, and you're going to see these different kind of things that are underlined for our purposes. So what is ableism? Ableism is a system. We just go pause right there. My ancestors are preachers, so I'm a preach anything. But it's a system, right, of assigning value to people's bodies and minds based on societally constructed ideas of normalcy, productivity, desirability, intelligence, excellence, and fitness. These ideas are rooted in eugenics, in anti-Blackness. Pause. Ableism is inherently anti-Black. I'm going to say that again. Ableism is inherently anti-Black. Put another way, my friend Saray Jarrell, amazing spiritualist and scholar, says, was there a such thing as an able-bodied enslaved African? No, because ableism is inherently anti-Black. Misogyny, colonialism, and capitalism. This systemic oppression leads to people and society determining people's value based on these different factors, right? Age, religion, health and wellness. This part is important. You do not have to be disabled to experience ableism. So ableism is all of our problem. When we go to an event and it's a super spreader and things come out and there's no protocol, we are all experiencing ableism. When the realtors say, you got to get back into this job, right, in person, you can't do telehealth no more, we are all experiencing ableism. So you do not have to be disabled to experience ableism. Please put in the chat for me, what are a few ways you've experienced or navigated ableism as you've been trying to build these hybrid spiritual communities? So some of us are navigating it, some of us are experiencing it, some of us, both things are happening. So I'd love to know from you, and I'll check the chat once we're done. What are a few ways that you've experienced or navigated ableism as we're building these hybrid spiritual communities? Thank you so much for those of you who I see the chat going, boop, 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 but I have ADHD, honey, so I'm not going to look right now. I go down the rabbit hole, but I'm appreciating you, and I'm so excited to check it as we go along. So we need to reimagine by prioritizing communal wellness over individual cure. Dr. Hinton went so beautifully into this that I'm not going to do too much with this, but there is a difference between cure and wellness. Cure comes from the medical model of disability, and usually there's a binary. You're either sick or you're well, right? But for Black people, we experience disabling impulses and realities, capitalism, imperialism, racism, sexism, right? Homophobia, heteronormativity. And so these things reinforce the sick versus well binary. Cure is an individual has an issue, so an individual has to get medical intervention. That's cure. But wellness goes more on the social model of disability. And this says societies and systems can become enabling or disabling, and the wellness ethic may or may not include medical interventions. So it might include singing, it might include dancing, it might include laying on of hands, it might include energy work, it might include praise songs or Reiki. It might include all of these different things because wellness is a communal practice. Yes. So here's wellness through the lens of Afro-Spiritual and healing lineages. Wellness enlists the help of the entire community. And what we heard from Dr. Hinton's presentation was about Tony K. Bambara and the Salt Eaters, and how there were actually 12 people that were participating in this wellness moment. So wellness enlists the help of the community. And wellness can happen through the power of telling our stories, through healing circles, through divination, through embodiment, and all of these different things. And if you want to get deep into it, remember, I put these little footnotes in there for you. So go ahead and just write it down. And at the end, you can take a screenshot of the resources you can look at. So here are some Black feminist Afro-Spiritual archetypes of wellness. Minnie Ransom has made an appearance again. So Minnie Ransom wants us to know their story. So I'm not going to go too deep into this, but one of the questions that they asked is, Are you sure that you want to be well? Because there's a weight of wellness. And this weight of wellness, she was talking about the communal weight of wellness, what we all have to do with each other's wellness. And so this is one Black feminist archetype of wellness, Minnie Ransom. Anansi the spider, I love Anansi the spider. Anansi is an Afro-diasporic archetype, right? And they are a divine shapeshifter spider. Sometimes they show up as femme, sometimes they show up as masc, sometimes they show up as non-binary, sometimes they show up as a spider. So they have this shape-shifting ability. And Anansi the spider was reimagined by Soraya Palmer in The Human Origins of Beatrice Porter and Other Essential Ghosts. This book just came out this year. I highly recommend it. And we'll also get into Baby Suggs Holy, who was imagined by Toni Morrison in Beloved in 1987. I'm going to stop my share for just a moment so I can really get into these Afro-spiritual archetypes. Minnie Ransom, Anansi the spider, and Baby Suggs Holy. So Minnie Ransom, of course, we know was created by Toni K. Bambara, and the protagonists, we know that we meet them after ongoing and chronic mental health crises. The important thing to remember is that the healing tools or the wellness tools that Minnie Ransom used were question asking and waiting for consent, deep listening, music, dance, communication with spirits, Orisha, Iwa, laying on of hands, and prayer. Beatrice Porter, in the second book, Human Origins of Beatrice Porter and Other Essential Ghosts, where they reimagine Anansi. This book is written by Soraya Palmer. They're a writer and a cultural worker who advocates for survivors of gender-based violence. They were born in Flatbush, New York. Beatrice Porter, the protagonist in the book, is a Black and chronically ill abuse survivor, a cancer survivor, a seer of Jumbi or ghosts, and a weaver of powerful stories and myths. And this book engages Anansi, the divine shape-shifting trickster spider from the Fawn people and across the Black diaspora, as a Black feminist archetype. They talk about in this book how Anansi stories became Anansi stories instead of tiger stories. They used to be tiger stories, but Tiger was a bully, and Tiger kept bullying Anansi until Anansi was crafty and was a trickster, and they figured out how to best Tiger, and now the tiger stories are now called Anansi stories. But Beatrice Porter, this chronically ill abuse survivor and cancer survivor, when she was asked by her child, "So what is the story saying, Mom? Are you saying that there will always be bullies, but we should keep our chin up until the day we can fight back?" My mother, Beatrice Porter, strokes my cheeks before holding my face in her hands. "No," she says, "I'm saying that Anansi is a woman." And then we are silent. Her argument is that Anansi uses the power of telling their stories just as Black women, femmes, and gender non-binary folks, abuse survivors, chronically ill folks, can use our stories to really make change in this particular realm that we're in. Baby Suggs Holy, that is a character that we come to through the work of Toni Morrison, who is a Pulitzer Prize-winning novelist, professor, and editor born in Lorain, Ohio. Baby Suggs Holy is a community-appointed healer in freshly post-emancipation world of Beloved, this novel. Baby Suggs Holy was a disabled woman. I don't think people always get that, even when they read the text, right? And so the text says, after situating herself on a huge flat-sided rock, Baby Suggs prayed silently, and they talk about her twisted hip, right? She does not give them, "Here's your cure." She tells them to sing, to dance, to laugh, to be with one another, to cry, to embody, right? And these are healing ways. And so with this last minute that I have, what I want to do is I want to share my screen with you so that you can see some best practices and the resources for the ways that we can continue to reimagine hybrid spiritual communities through Black feminist and Afro-spiritual archetypes of wellness and the expansiveness of wellness. We center communal wellness through modifying body, mind-based practices. If you have a dance, modify it 3 different ways. If you have a stretch, if you have an event, modify it 3 different ways. Committing to cross-disability solidarity, understanding that being neurodivergent or having walking with mobility aids, all of these things are important to cross-disability solidarity. We celebrate and we position towards interdependence, which in hybrid spiritual communities, that might look like mutual aid efforts or ride shares. I don't know if y'all remember the church van, honey, but I remember the church van go pick up the elders and the sick folks so we can all experience the visiting list, COVID safety protocols, and intersectional leadership, but most importantly, the leadership of those who are most impacted, right, by these things. I hope that you will keep in touch with me. I'm creating hybrid spiritual community at these 3 different places. You can take a screenshot of that if you want to keep up with me, but most of it is just my name, Jade T. Perry. And these are the resources for you. So if you wrote down a number and you wanted to go a little bit more deeper into the topic, this is where you can do that.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Jade. Ashe, fingers, reactions. This whole panel has just been so beautiful and powerful. And we thank you for including the interactive component in your presentation. I see, many responses, and I also really appreciate you bringing it to the fore that we do not have to ourselves be considered disabled to experience ableism, right? All of us is the same. And very similarly, we often don't think of how these different axes of oppression affect those of us who may not necessarily consider ourselves a part of whichever community is being oppressed. But ultimately, any axis of oppression, right, affects all of us. Any way in which one of us is being excluded excludes all of us on one level or another. And so it's very important for all of us, right, to pay attention. And as well as Dr. Ogunnaike mentioned, oftentimes we think of disability or we think of different types of ability as being something that we either are born with or not, when in fact, as we're learning through COVID, as you mentioned, and as has been mentioned earlier, and through other means, even before COVID, that we never know. Ifa says, we may think we know today, we may hope to know tomorrow. And when the 3rd day comes, we don't know at all what is going to happen there. And so it's very important for us to remember that any of us, right, can have a change in our ability at any point in time in our lives. And so, when we advocate for a hybrid community, when we advocate for accessibility in various ways, when we advocate for all of these things, we are advocating ultimately for ourselves and every member of our community. So thank you all for these wonderful, wonderful presentations. I hope that you will stay in touch with each of the presenters. We want to thank again, Dr. Hunter, Dr. Ogunnaike, Dr. Hinton, Sister Elmina, sibling Jade. Thank you all so much for each of your contributions to this important discussion. Thank you so much. For those who are here in person with us in Charlotte, we are going to be connecting up at Harmony Health Services. So we look forward to seeing those of you who are able to be with us there. And of course, we look forward to being together again tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. for Orisha prayer and meditation. So speaking of, and thank you so much, Jade, for highlighting my hybrid community. So those of you who may not already be in touch with us, please do. You can follow and subscribe at youtube.com/AsheIray, and that will connect you to our community where we have Orisha prayer and meditation every Sunday morning. Again, if you have questions or comments, part of this whole experience is creating community. So please do connect with the speakers, reach out to them, form, I definitely, of course, especially amongst the presenters, there's so many beautiful connections. And thank you, Deji, for recognizing that. I always really try to put things together that go together. So Jade and Anna, I definitely think you all have beautiful, beautiful intersections to explore, and absolutely everyone has just been so wonderful and so interconnected. So I thank you all for being here. I'm sorry to kind of have to rush away. The hybridness means that I have to now move to another location in person. So grateful to each of you. Please do stay in touch with one another and with us. And I look forward to seeing those who are able to join us tomorrow morning. All right. Odabo family. Oh, I'll open us up so we can say Odabo to one another with our voices. Yes.
Odabo.
Odabo.